So going live.
Oh, we're live.
Alrighty, guys. Yes, sorry, Bob. Should have given you a countdown there,
That's
Canada
all right.
Poly. Hi, everyone. We are live with Canada Poly, one
Hello,
of,
everyone.
I don't know, my favorite Canadian YouTubers. Steve and I have been watching him since he kind of started. Awesome to see his channel growing. So I'm going to push it on over to Canada Poly to say hello. We have something very special today. He's showing his face. I have to say,
Yes.
I'm pretty excited. So say hello. What got you into making a channel? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello. Yes. Well, my name is Mark. You can call me Mark. That's all good. And what got me into doing the channel was disillusionment with the reporting in Ontario originally with the Ontario provincial election. There was lots of talk about sanctuary provinces and lots of misinformation kind of going out there. And I was frustrated by that. And I was talking with a friend of mine, and I did my typical diatribe, except without my tabs and without all of my stuff. And he was like, yeah. And as I was driving home, he agreed with me. And as I was driving home, I thought, I wish I could package that up because other people might be interested in it. And then I did. So, and here I am. And it was, at the beginning, I think it was a little rocky, and I learned a lot. And the amount of people, both other YouTubers and people who were watching, who gave great advice and lots of support and like, hey, good job. It's really interesting watching. And even you, saying that you watch my show a lot and that I'm one of your favorites. That's incredible. Like that's such a neat experience because, man, looking at all of the stuff that I look at, and I mean, putting my show together, I get responses a lot talking about how angry people are sometimes, like, my goodness, all this stuff happening in Canada, and nobody's really telling a cohesive story about it, right? And I'm glad that people can watch what I do and are like it, but it was an outlet for me. It was so I stopped driving everybody that knows me personally crazy with my, like, trying to engage people in conversation. Like, did you hear about this? Here's what's happening. And they're like, dude, it's Friendship Day on Facebook. Like, chill out. I'm like, oh my God. So
that's fair. It's kind of how I started my channel too. Just same reason. We have totally different channels, but I felt like if I complained about politics to Steve one more time, like, he was lovingly like, yes, dear, and it's not that he's not incredibly supportive, but I was getting ranty, and it was getting to the point where I needed to get that out somewhere, because I felt like some of what I was saying was reasonably cohesive. And I thought, well, maybe other people will appreciate the message, or someone will think twice about something, or whatever it was. And so I didn't expect it to I didn't know where it was going to go. Right. So I'm really glad you're doing what you're doing, because like you said, you put together a cohesive storyline. And what you find, I'm sure you've noticed, all over, say, Twitter and everything else, you do report on those things, but you take it with some context. So what's happening now is we have polarization and sort of outrage culture and gotcha culture, and people really wanting to share a story first or be mad about something. And then often all the facts get missed. So what I like is, when I don't have time to read the news for a couple of days, I throw on your channel, and I know that you're covering some of the most important stories. You're not going to, you have a bit of a conservative or PPC bias, but you don't hide that, right? And I really respect that, because we don't get that from anywhere else.
Yeah. And I try, that's what I'm trying to show, my bias, to say, like, yeah, this is what I agree with, and here's why I agree with this. Part of it too is I used to spend a long time on Facebook, like far too long on Facebook. I would get into arguments with people, and it was like a dopamine hit, right? Like, you'd get that dopamine hit and you'd open Facebook and somebody would respond to you, and it was an argument. And this is going back a few years, because I don't use Facebook anymore, if I can help it. And so all of that time was almost not wasted, but like, I wasn't going to convince the people who I was arguing with on Facebook. They're not interested really in hearing another side of things. They're more interested in the likes they get from arguing with me. So, okay, fair. And I had a few posts taken off of Facebook, and I saw they were shaped or something like that, and I had workarounds. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, why am I giving all this content away to Facebook for free? And it's just being off into a void, right? Flushed down the toilet, and it's just gone. And I thought, somebody somewhere might be interested in the links that I use to put these arguments together. Somebody somewhere might be able to use my argument when they're talking with somebody else. Somebody somewhere might see something that I don't see and will tell me about it. And that's another part of it too. I don't want to be crazy, right? And when you don't have a lot of feedback, when the people giving you feedback are all of a certain lefty bent, and Facebook is a left-leaning social platform nowadays. I think it was maybe more center before, but I was also on the left before. So now Facebook is very left leaning, and well, there's not a whole lot of space for conservatives. And I felt crazy. I was like, sound fiscal policy and responsible spending is not something to vilify somebody for. It is something to say, yeah, that's probably a good idea. That's how we should run our country. So I thought it was so strange to have all these people mad at me for very common sense positions. Like, this is actually how life works, guys. This is how things work. And are there conversations to be had to figure out like the best way to plan things? Sure. Is there a difference between left and right? Yes. Can we find a balance that works? I hope so, because this isn't working.
That's just it. Like, it's we can all get all tribal and get into our teams, but ultimately, what are we actually going to do, right? What are we going to do in this country? Because we're not all going to agree. You're not going to turn every liberal conservative and vice versa. Right. And the people who are more centrist and willing to look at all sides aren't the loudest voices, and they're not the ones making policy, generally speaking, right? Which is, I think, why both of us are probably involved in the PPC, which we'll get into a little bit later. Yep. You mentioned that you get a lot of feedback in your comments, that people are telling you things, as well as giving you some information, perhaps maybe corrections, constructive criticism. I myself find the comment section extremely, extremely useful. I find it very different than, say, Twitter or Facebook. I'm assuming you find the same. It's a lot more personal. Mm-hmm. For me, I'd rather talk to you in person. I'd rather have a conversation, shake someone's hand, look them in the eye. I grew up rural, and that was what my dad always said. You got to trust someone by their firm handshake, and you can see a lot with just meeting someone. There's not a lot you can see online. And so at least with YouTube, you get a little bit of personal touch. It's not quite the same, but it's so much better. And you can have more sort of humane, long form, nuanced discussions. So with that, though, of course, comes the haters. And I'm just curious because you're so, the way that you present it is so, I guess I would say, not only practical, but it's also like very educational. You're not coming off as an extremist. You're not coming off as a, provocateur. What kind of, do you get negative feedback as well? Are people just mad in general? Or do you find that you're getting a lot better reception now on YouTube? Like, how has it been overall?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that kind of leads on from the Facebook conversation. There was a lot of hate on Facebook. Like, I would get privately people messaging me saying, hey, great job. I can't agree with you, and I can't like your status, but I wanted to tell you that what you're doing, I agree with. And I thought that was weird when I was on Facebook. And then on YouTube, I have like 99% likes on most of my videos. Some videos have like 100% likes, which is weird and cool. Like, I think that's neat when I am able to articulate something that people agree with like that. That's neat. But most of my videos are largely agreed with most of the time. And that's cool. So the hate disappeared once people came to me, rather than me, yelling in a lefty area or a lefty social network or something to that effect. I just put my stuff out there, and people who agree with me kind of attach themselves to me, and not attached, just watch my show or have the little subscription or whatever. And so that seems to have helped deliver what I'm actually trying to say. And one of my biggest concerns, I think, in my show and in politics now too, is that my intention will get lost in the medium somehow. You know what I mean? Like, what I mean to say will come out badly, and somebody will take that snippet and be like, see, he's that hateful person that we all said he was. And I try not to be hateful. I don't think I'm hateful. And so that's very cool to see all the both positive comments. Yesterday, I made a mistake in my show. I talked about the male single father homes, single mother homes, and I made a mistake. I said, single fathers are above single mothers, and what are you talking about, Michelle Rempel? And I got it wrong. And I don't like getting it wrong, but I'll correct it when I get it wrong, and that was the start of my show after the opening meme this morning. I was like, yeah, I messed up. Here it is. I messed it up, and this is how I messed it up. And, I talked about my point. My point wasn't really about the number. It was about, shaming men on Mother's Day, which is, come on, Michelle Rempel. But I like that interaction. I like having an audience that feels comfortable to say, hey man, you got this wrong, but thanks for trying. You know what I mean? Thanks for putting it out there. And that's what I'm doing. I'm trying my best to put out an interesting show that talks about what's going on in our country, because man, the cast of characters is hilarious. Why isn't anybody talking about these people? It's crazy. It's so funny. Like, so, and yeah, with the partisanship, I'm not trying to push my ideology. Like, if you watch my show and you agree with me, cool. And if you disagree with me, Cool. Let's have a conversation about what it is. Where do we disagree? What's the thing that I'm missing, or what's the thing that you're missing about my position? And let's figure it out, right? Like that's, to me, that's the spot where you're making order out of chaos, to quote Dr. Peterson, right? Like that's the spot where the majority of learning comes in. That's the spot where it's like, well, we're making magic, right? Here's one other thing that I find interesting. I've been thinking about it a lot the last couple of days. Dr. Peterson, again, and I don't want to make this all about Dr. Peterson, but he was saying that humans are individually flawed, right? Thinking single humans are individually flawed, but we're not individual creatures. We're group creatures. We're pack animals, right? And when you have a family, that's a thinking unit, right? So if you say to yourself, and I looked at it in this context the other day. I walk my daughter to the bus in the mornings. Every morning I walk my daughter to school, to the bus stop. And yesterday morning it was raining. And I live with my wife and my mother-in-law and my 2 kids. And my mother-in-law said to me, "It's raining out. You might need an umbrella." And I said, it's okay. It's probably just fine. It's not a problem. No problem. I left with my daughter, and my mother-in-law drove the umbrella to me at the bus stop because I was wrong. So we were a thinking unit there, right? We had a conversation. We had a disagreement. That was a conversation, a decision we made as a unit, and she helped me. And I would have been wet without that support, without that help. And that is an interesting thing. And the goal here is what we're trying to achieve is a thinking unit in the House, right? A thinking unit to govern our country in a way that hits that balance, that hits that there's nothing ever perfect. There's nothing that is 100% right all the time. There's nothing that gets that. But what you can do is become that thinking unit and say, is this right? No, I don't think that's right. Well, maybe this is right. Maybe I don't think quite there, but maybe here. And you get to that point where you meet that balance and you have it and it's perfect, or it's as perfect as we can make it. And the conversation doesn't end there. And that's the important part, right? It's not like we've solved this. Now put it off to the side. No, we've solved this. And if we need to revisit it, we'll revisit it and have that hard conversation again that gets us close. But with vilifying and the way things have gone, it's hard to do, right? In real life, it's hard to do. And so that's interesting. It's interesting to live through.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of brought that up with so much context. And I think that's part of what I enjoy about your channel is that you bring about, even though you're presenting facts, you're presenting articles, you're not getting into as much of, kind of the videography side of it. You're not trying to make skits. You're not doing any of that, but you do manage to come across as very personable, very likable, and definitely not someone that has an intention that is meant to harm anyone or hurt anyone. You definitely have I guess you could say like a gentle visage. You could say, it's something that is palatable to most Canadians. It's something I also try to seek as well, is some form of moderation, because like you said, the goal is not perfection. I think that's the problem with leftism, which we'll get into in a moment because it ties in nicely with my next question. The issue is often that people want utopia. They want perfection. They want everybody to feel the same and everybody to never have hatred and bigotry and all these different things. No one's willing to talk about what those terms mean. No one's willing to define them. No one's willing to have the conversation with the very people that they say they disagree with. So they say that they think you're evil, basically, but they won't just sit down and tell you their concerns. This is what, makes me feel bad. This, because it's often about feelings, right? And it's really sad because you end up with just anger and more division, less unity. And like you said, with the family unit, you're not ever going to have the perfect partner, the perfect kids, the perfect mother-in-law. You're not going to have that. But what you can have is an attempt with good faith and good conversations to see the best in the other person and try to actually be moving forward in a realistic way that's good for everybody. That's what I find is lacking here, and not just in Canada, elsewhere in politics. What are we actually wanting? Are we wanting to, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy, right? And ultimately, I think Canada needs to stop, Canadians need to stop focusing on just being right and gotcha-ing the other person and focusing on outrage and actually focusing on where we're heading. Before I get into the question, I was going to get into some stuff about Trudeau, but first I just wanted to touch on something that I find probably, I'm assuming, works into your show without maybe even being consciously, without you being consciously aware of it, but you do have some experience in the field of mental health. And I know that that's something that's, I find that really, really respectable. That's not an easy thing to work with. It takes a great deal of patience, compassion, and openness. And I'm just curious how you feel that has changed how you view politics and how you do this on your channel.
Yeah, well, it's okay. 15 years in mental health. And to give context, I worked in group homes, a group home that was attached to a school. And then I worked in the school as well. that was attached to the group home, right? So I went through that, and then I worked with education board, a specific one, and all of that made me a better parent. All of that made me better able to sit down with, not sit down with, no, better able to respond to the never-ending hydra of situations that come up when you're a parent, right? Like there's going to be things stuck in kids' noses. There's going to be things stuck in their ear. There's going to break something. We're going to have to go to the hospital. They're going to have to eat at regular times, right? And these are things that 20-year-olds don't care about so much, but I had to, because I was working. I went to college at 17. I was working at 20 because I was a male in a largely female-dominated world. So it's funny, going back when you were talking about, I put out a kind visage. That is when you are a 30-year-old or 25-year-old, 28-year-old, whatever, man, and you are working with I worked with latency age kids in the school. So I worked for years, 5 years, a long time. I worked with the youngest cohort. So the primary one class, which was kindergarten and even pre-kindergarten to grade 3. And I'm giant. Like I'm a huge, I'm 6'2", and at the time I was 230 pounds. So I was bigger, right? And now I'm 185, so I'm less big, but I'm still very tall. And so I'm a very intimidating person. And I worked in a mental health facility that actively practiced restraints. I am currently, well, no, not anymore. I was up until recently trained on how to do proper restraints, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it was serious, right? Serious business. And you don't put your hands on a child in a non-serious way, right? So you need to be trained in that and certified, et cetera. And all of that plays to me trying to structure my arguments in a way that I can give them to you. You know what I mean? I want to package this up in a way that it's just, here you go, and have you take them for what they are and dissect them at your own time. And not that that's the way I worked with kids, but man, going through those experiences and learning how to fail, learning through failure, how to do it better. Because the amount of times I failed in getting across what I was trying to do into helping the child in whatever situation, de-escalating a situation between two kids or between another staff member and a kid, or it doesn't matter. You have to choose your words as carefully as you can, right? Like words matter. I said to my daughter, she's young, well, she's 6 and a smart 6. So she's been lying for a little while, right? The smarter the kid, the earlier they learn to lie. And I noticed my daughter lying. True. Yes, definitely. I noticed her lying a few years ago. And I said to my wife, we've got to stop that. We've got to stop that behavior. I know what she's doing. I know she's lying. You know, she's lying. Come on. And so when you notice that, you have to, well, working with kids forever, there's no scam that my daughter can get away with that I'm not like wise to, right? So I have to kind of let it play out and let her come to the realization that lying is bad. But at the same time, I have to, come down like a ton of bricks. So yeah, on the one side of things, I choose my words as carefully as I do because of a lot of experience using words. And I said to my daughter when she was lying, your words are your weapons. Use them with care, right? Your weapons have no power if there's no truth behind them. If you're lying, it's like you're not saying anything. It's not, there's nothing to back it up. I said, your words are your weapons, right? Be powerful. Don't lie. And that hasn't hit home yet, but it will. It will. I hope. And
I'm certain of it.
I can keep my fingers crossed. And with regards to how meticulous I am with putting my argument together, my mind explodes with questions. And if I don't have any more questions, then I've put together a good show. If I'm like, oh, why is that like that? Like, I don't understand why that's like that, or what this thing is, and far too often it's easy to read a newspaper article and say, well, I don't know what that is. I don't know what I was doing a local show, and development charges was something a term I hadn't come across before. And development charges are just how much it costs a developer to build a house in your area, in your neighborhood, in your city. And how developer charges relate to the article is homelessness and housing prices. And I just, so I went and looked it up and used the information to inform my video, inform the audience, because if I didn't know, I have to assume they didn't know, right? Like, and I'm interested in this stuff. You're probably not as interested as I am, right? Like, so yeah.
No, right on. There's a few points I kind of wanted to touch on that. First of all, the fact that you've worked with children, and particularly children that you might have to spend a little extra time, to really work with, to have them understand. I don't want to be mean, but I mean, you were once a leftist, or I guess you could say a
Yes.
liberal voter,
Oh
and
yeah.
and
Oh
so
yeah.
was I. And I have to say that lately, it kind of ties in. I was going to get into a question from the chat from Old Stock White Canadian. The examples, however, you are giving are imbued with inherent present love. Your mother-in-law didn't yell at you. Fine, just die type of thing. The political discourse is not based in respect. And I was thinking, when you're talking about how you speak to a lot of children, or children who have, some issues, you could say social issues, whatever it is, mental issues, health issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so different than talking to some, not all leftists, but like activist leftists, far leftists.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there's a lot of, she is right. There's not a lot of you can do in the face of such angry yelling, Antifa throwing stuff at people and kicking their camera. Like it's unfortunate that your type of speech, if you were in Portland right now, would still get considered to be hate speech. You know what I mean? And so it is true. I have to throw that out there that I suppose when we talk about the ideals of speaking to people and bringing some level of mediation, it's only as ideal as the people going into that agreement. Are they going to actually join you in that goal, or are they going to just keep yelling and screaming? And sadly, like some children, they do keep yelling and screaming.
Yep.
But
well, and they're coming at it from a different lens. They're coming at it from power, right? I'm utilizing power. I'm utilizing my audience. I'm utilizing my. I mean, they could even bring it down about race or something to that effect as well. Which, sure, if they want to bring it down to that, whatever. But if they're looking at it through that lens, and I'm fundamentally looking at it through a different lens, and often the lens that I look at something through is problem solving. Like, what is the part where we are diverging? What part do we disagree with? And how can we come together? How can we come to a balance? How can we come to an agreement on that? And there are things with people that I have been friends with that we're going to have to agree to disagree. Like, and it's okay that we disagree. There is all sorts of things in this world that I am not going to know the answer to. I'm not going to see the end of. Winds of Winter is probably going to come out right after climate change is 100% proved to be caused by humans, right? Like, I'm making a joke, but the point is, it's okay to disagree, and it's okay to have different points of view, and it's okay to come at things from different perspectives. But the problem is exactly what you're saying. When somebody is in a war mentality, and a I'm going to get you mentality, and a I'm not willing to work with you because you represent the thing that I want to tear down. And I mean, in that situation, there's not a lot of meeting in the middle, because there is no middle to meet that person with. So in that situation, unfortunately, you can't get to that important conversation, or that important resolution, unfortunately, right? And sometimes I did a talk. If you look up my name, I did a talk about why time is your biggest weapon against children, or against difficult children. I think it was years ago now, but it's on the internet, on YouTube. I'm sure maybe we'll put a link in the description. I'll find it for you. But basically, sometimes you have to show somebody that you're not scared, you're not afraid. The things that they're doing don't frighten you. It's okay to be acting that way. And now when you're done, now when we've gone to the end, and you've shown me how bad you can be, right? How terrible this child, right, is, or whatever, up to 13 when I was in the group home, right? And often they'd come in and they'd show you how bad they can be. Once you get them to understand that I've seen worse, me personally, I've seen worse. You don't scare me, kid, but I'm going to help you solve your problem, right? Because most of the time what happens is these kids scare the adults away, and they say, I don't want to work with them. That's why they came to me, right? Whoa, that kid's too violent. And then they meet me and they're like, oh, I've got this guy. I'm just going to kick him in the shin and I'm going to punch him. And then he's going to send me off, just like all the other adults have done.
Right.
Right. But I was the end of the road. That was it. Right. I was it. And oftentimes, oftentimes kids hated me the first 3 weeks. Right. And then once they realized that I was fair but firm, I had my expectations and they were high. But once you understand my expectation, and I was never in a situation that I would be mean to kids. As I said, time is your biggest weapon. If kids aren't ready, then you say, okay, I've got time. I've got all the rest of this work week and next work week, and I'm probably going to be working here next year too. So if it takes you a year, and some kids it took a year, right? Most of them not, but some kids it did. Then I'll still be here. I'll still come in trying to help you, and I won't stop no matter what you do. And a lot of these kids hadn't heard that before, right? And so that's, man, my life is an interesting one. And I don't know if that approach, or if that experience, that lived experience, will translate well to government. I don't know if it will. I don't know if that lived experiences will translate well to helping constituents or dealing with somebody who's upset at whatever. I mean, it is a complicated thing, the government. You affect real people with the choices that you make in Ottawa, and I understand that. So I hope that it does help me. I hope that it does give me the brevity to understand that the things that are happening in my narrow view are just that, right? And I don't know everything. I can't know everything. So I have to rely on that thinking unit. I have to rely on that group that I put around me to say, hey, did you remember that umbrella? No. And then drive it out to me when I say, no, it's fine, I don't need the umbrella, right? Like, that's the point, right? So, and yeah.
No, fair enough. I think you say you're not sure if these experiences and this training and all of this will translate well in your future and in politics and everything else. I'm going to say it probably will. Again, it won't be something that you're consciously thinking of every time you step into a situation or a conversation or do an interview, but you are going to notice that it will make your life probably substantially easier, just because you have a better understanding of people and the human psyche. And it also shows, I felt a little, you hit me in the feels there for a minute. Your compassion, right? Like, this is something that I wish more leftists would understand about more conservatives. I use that word very loosely because I know a lot of my views are probably more classical liberal. And I think the word conservative now has just become, well, all the words are all messed up and nothing matters and nothing is what it's supposed to be. It's all a big clown world, right? But people think that there's no compassion in the conservative camp, and that's absolute baloney. And, speaking with you and talking about your experiences, it really goes to show that. Now, I'm going to quickly dive into a question in the chat. I was going to wait till the ends, but this one ties right in. Same person that brought up the comment about, how you can't really speak to people when they're being reasonable, asks, if I had a question to both of you, what would be the advice you'd give someone not a natural born eloquent speaker to share and have an outreach and debate with people until October? I'm going to give that one to you for a moment if you have any advice.
I have advice. Yes. Advice. I have a story. So when I was young, grade 4, in my school, in my board of education, whatever, grade 4 was the first year for speeches. And I was terrified of speaking in public, absolutely horrified of the idea of speaking in public. And I had a lot of anxiety when I was a kid. I was a very high-strung kid, lots of anxiety. I was a fat kid too. And it was one of those things that I operated like here all the time. It was very difficult. I had problems sleeping when I was young, blah, 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 blah. But the crux of it was I did not want to do any public speaking. My mom advocated for me and said, he doesn't have to like, are you crazy? Look at what this is doing to this child. He doesn't have to do this. And the school said fine. And I had to do the speaking in front of my teacher and my mom, which was worse. But at the same time, whatever, it was fine. So how does that awful, terrible story translate to now? Well, I'm not the kid that I was back then. And when I have something to say, it jumps out of my brain. Like, I start talking to other people about it, and I'm testing it, right? This is the thinking unit. This is the family, or the people that you choose to have around you, the people that you trust to have around you, the people that you want their opinion about what you think. That's your thinking unit, right? And so when I have something to say, I test what I want to say to my family, my thinking unit. I say, what about this? What about this? And I make jokes, and we work it out during those conversations, and you don't realize you're doing it, but you are doing it. And I am doing it. I do it actively all the time. And the crux of the problem is not knowing what I wanted to say, not knowing what to attack, because the people coming back at you are going to have 3 or 4 different things. If you're talking about climate change, or if you're talking about gender dysphoria, if you're talking about any of the hot button issues that are currently around, if you go on Google, you can see the talking points listed on the first 2 pages. They're going to say, denying science, blah, 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 all this stuff. They're almost animated by the propaganda, right? Useful idiots abound. And that's just true of the world that we live in. So have what you want to say worked out. Have an idea of what they're going to say back to you, because you have to be, I call it arming yourself. If you, right, weapons, your words are your weapons. And if you're unarmed, you don't know what to say. You're going to be caught off guard. You're going to be flat footed. And if somebody says the climate is changing and you say, no, it's not, you're going to not win the argument, right? Because you're not armed. Yeah. You don't have anything to say to that, right? But you could say, well, what about all the airport data that shows no warming in the last 20 years? And they say, what are you talking about? And you show them a link. Or you say, what about, I go with questions, right? What about certain, well, it doesn't matter at this point. I don't want to get off on climate change or any of those issues. I'm just pointing out. Sorry?
Whole other ball game.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is. And it's what people try and engage you on, and it's what people try and do the gotcha stuff on. And like I said, I'm much more interested in having a robust conversation about the width and breadth of it, rather than saying this is definitely the problem and this is definitely the solution, except that we don't have the evidence that this is the problem, and we don't have evidence the solution fixes it. So that's a problem, right? That's a problem that we should talk about. But evidently that's denying science or something. I'm not sure. So, and so here I am talking online about the things that really should be broadcast by the leaders, right? Like I think I would love to have Mr. Bernier in a long form conversation like this, even like 10 or 15 minutes on one topic, just, get into it. But 10 minutes isn't enough. We've been talking for half an hour and we're just getting started, right? And we've gotten into some things. So, possibly it could work for 10 or 15 minutes, but maybe a hard 20 minutes for one topic. But I think that's more where I want to see the political discord going. Like, I don't know who Andrew Scheer is, and I don't know if he can tap dance. And the liberal tap dance is, you get that, you pull that talking point out. Sometimes the liberals read the talking point for you on the House floor, right? But I don't know if Andrew Scheer is going to do the liberal tap dance. Is there something in his head? Can he? I don't have notes, right? Like, I have my show and I have the things that I do and I read a lot. I'm interested a lot. I know Andrew Scheer is a smart guy. You don't get to be leader of a political party in Canada if you're not an intelligent person. I'm not questioning that. And I'm not questioning his patriotism either, right? Like, I don't think you get into politics if you're not patriotic. And so, because of all of that, I find it interesting that I don't know if he can hold his own in a long form interview. I don't know if he could do 3 hours with Joe Rogan, or if you've listened to, and Rogan's, he's interviewed so many people. You could listen for 3 hours. Have you seen the Robert Schoch, SHOCH interview?
No, I haven't seen that.
It's so good. It's so good. He's an Egyptologist, and it's so interesting. But that interview flies by, 3 hours, right? And if you don't have something in your head, if there's not a whole lot to talk about, it's going to die after an hour and 15 minutes. Some people just don't have a lot to talk about, and that's okay. Like, some people aren't interested in talking. They're interested in watching or sitting or whatever, and that's okay. But if you're going to be leading the country, man, I want to deep dive. I want to know you. And I want to talk quickly about, you were talking about how YouTube's kind of a different thing. I think I am blown away by how well my audience knows me. And I'm honest on my show. I try and be honest on my show. I try and tell you what I think, and I show you why I think it. This is what the reason I think this, right? Here it is. Here's all of my proof. And with all of that, I get back in the comments, and I get back on CANADAPOLI.com, and I get back all sorts of gems that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I wouldn't have known, or I wouldn't have realized, or so many neat things. And people with me running in my riding in Guelph, the support that I've gotten from local people is incredible. The support I've gotten from people who have watched my show for a year. I've had people come up and shake my hand and say, "I've been watching since you were Ontario Poly," and that blew me away.
I remember on Poly. Yeah, that's how you started, eh?
Yeah, and I was like, "Wow, man! Like, that's such an incredible thing." So I think that it's such a neat bridge, and I hope it translates. I've told my EDA, and a lot of the people in my EDA, well, they watch my show now, but a couple of them watched my show before, and they knew me too, right? People came into a room and I started talking, and I guess I have a very recognizable speech pattern.
You do have a distinctive voice, and someone in the chat earlier had said that you have a great radio voice. I completely concur, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, it's very recognizable, and people were right away like, "Stop talking. Are you CANADAPOLI?" And I was like, wow. So I mean, all of that blew me away. But how well people know me, and how well kind of earnest, I guess, is the best word I can think of. Like, I just feel like what I'm saying is not right, but like, is this real? And then, is this conversation? No, when I put it out, it's something done, and it's like, I want to talk about this, and the response is always positive, and it's so staggeringly amazing that it's hard to put into words.
Well, it's very validating, right? It's very validating to say, I don't know if I should have done that video, or did I put that out the right way? Was I effective? Is this even a useful topic? Does anybody care? And then suddenly you get back these comments where someone, I couldn't say that myself, or thank you for the point, or really, help me understand something. It is kind of like almost getting a little bit of an extended family in some ways. Like, I know for me, going through personal stuff, once I'm willing to share it, the prayers and the blessings, and like you said, the earnest desire for people to kind of get to know you. And it is interesting because you do start to pick up on people's personalities, and because you're very open with the way you speak. It's funny, you're mentioning that when you were younger, you had, anxiety, and that that your mind works very quickly. And I couldn't help but smile a little bit, not because you had anxiety, that's not fun at all, but because Steve had just said a couple days ago, he speaks that, CANADAPOLI speaks quickly, which is not in any way an insult. I speak very quickly as well. And this is the only, at work, I get always in trouble for it because it's how I speak. But on here, it's just, it's allowed. It's kind of okay. So I appreciate that. But we can tell, he said, I can tell that his brain just works like 100 miles a minute, and it's like, you can pick up those personality traits with video where you can't pick them up on Twitter. Hell, you don't even know on Twitter if the person you're talking to is a real person, or is, the fifth account that they've created that day. I'm going to use this to kind of segue into another question that was asked by Steve LTT, because we're talking about the positives and people that are listening and paying attention. If I had to answer that question, by the way, on what to do until October, I think CANADAPOLI covered it pretty well. My only advice to everyone, if you're trying to get any sense knocked into anyone, is to just be as honest as possible. Like CANADAPOLI said, your words are your weapons, and be honest. The world is lacking honesty and authenticity and vulnerability in a strong way, not just emotions flying everywhere, but actually being able to wear your heart on your sleeve and be honest and also practical. If you can balance, your head, heart, and gut, like I try to show in my channel, it's rare and it's not that common. And I think that's something that goes underrated. So just use whatever your unique skills are, and, do your research, have a few talking points, try not to just regurgitate like buzzwords and insults that you hear on Twitter, because they'll just think you're a, right-wing propagandist, which is very frustrating when you have a lot more. Show your nuance. If you have more to talk about, show it. But this question here is for you, CANADAPOLI, give her.
Okay, hold on. Yeah, I was just going to jump in there. Another way, speech is speech, yes, and video is a very, very important medium. I think it does a really good job. But memes, like if your gift is art, I'm an amateur meme artist at best. Like, I'll put something on there and some letters and stuff and print it off, and people are like, "Oh, that looks good." It's terrible. But I've seen some crazy, awesome memes, and man, if you have those skills, use them. Put the memes out there. I have a board on CANADAPOLI.com that talks about meme warfare. I've got some other things coming up that is hopefully going to streamline, and Kelly, you and I can talk about it after we're off being live, but I've got some things hoping to work with to combine and not collaborate. Yeah, I guess collaborate. Find a place to put these memes, because they can be posted easily on Facebook or Twitter and shared easily. And if they have good information, you don't have to be articulate. You just have to be creative. And it's a different form of speech, but it's certainly just as valuable.
Very true, and very good for people who find they get tripped up when they're trying to speak with someone. If you just need that time and privacy to get your thoughts together, absolutely. I never thought of that because I also am a sucky meme maker. It's not my thing, but I recognize the value in it. So this kind of does segue into this idea we're talking about, getting in touch with people and how people respond to this whole doing the YouTube channel thing. CANADAPOLI, since you started your channel as an outlet, how do you find the response from those you know and love? So friends and family, did any unfriend you and then add you back? That's an interesting question.
Yes.
I talk about this on my channel a lot, so I won't get into my side because you're the featured guest today.
Fair enough.
I've certainly lost some friends and some, people, but I've gained back a million, so it doesn't matter. It is what it is. And I'd like to hear, what's your experience been with that, CANADAPOLI?
Yeah, well, okay, I kept my channel anonymous because of my Facebook experience, because there are a lot of people who didn't like me, but I mean, in being in education, I had a lot of people who were very left on my Facebook, right? I worked in education, I worked in schools, et cetera. So there's a lot of left-leaning political people congregating in schools. So when I started talking out in 2015, in September, I used to speak to a English department head about American politics, because man, like what a fun ride that was, right? And I said, it was probably September, October 2015, 2016. No, it was later. It was in the May or June of that school year that I said, he's going to win this. Trump's going to win this. And that was the last time I was invited to have politics discussions with that group of people. They were like, no, we're not talking to that guy anymore. So that was kind of the first salvo. I was like, speaking honestly about what I thought Trump was going to do, or about how it was going to react, was personal suicide. I was like, wow. And I wasn't even saying I want Trump to win. I was just saying, I think he might pull this one out. I think he might win because Hillary Clinton's that terrible. And so fast forward to kind of December 2016, Trump had won, and there was a lot of stuff going on. And this is before I started my channel, 2017, maybe even 2018. Yeah, I've only been on for a year. Yeah, so 2018. So 2017 was kind of when I stopped talking a lot with a large friend group of mine, and not because I was upset with them or angry with them, but it was, what more is there to say? I'm not sure, like, it's kind of talking about what we were talking about earlier. Like, I'm willing to come halfway. I'm willing to explain why I think what I think, and I'm willing to go with somebody, whoever, on a journey to figure out why they think what they think. And I'm fine to agree to disagree, no problems at all. But the issue is, if they think I'm a monster, if they think I'm either not intelligent enough to understand the left's viewpoint, which is a lot of people think that conservatives or people with conservative mentality are just not intelligent enough, or don't know about all of these existential threats or whatever it is. And if us as conservatives knew, then we would not have the feelings that we have. We would obviously agree with the left, right? And so one of the first things that I said, and it was like I was waking up, and it was really, honestly, that's the only way to describe it. I was sitting there having a debate with a friend, and I like to debate. I'll chat with anybody about anything, and we'll go in depth. Like, let's shake that tree. Let's figure out what this is, right? So we were discussing, and I alluded to it earlier, talking about crossing the border and how much that potentially costs healthcare, just for an example. But it costs education and roadways and everything. Everything gets more expensive when tax dollars don't cover the amount of people coming into a situation. That happens in southern states. That happens when Justin Trudeau opens the borders. So I was saying to my friend, the reason they can't have universal free healthcare in the United States is because they have a very leaky southern border. You can't have both things. You can't have an open border and free healthcare. It just doesn't work. I said, what would you do if people in Detroit started coming, pretend Detroit's like across the river, and they started coming to our hospital? Would that be okay? Would that be okay if that was the only place in Canada that was doing it, and we were told to, deal with it because nobody else is having a problem with it? And they got mad at me. And then we started talking about rights of children. And as I've said, I'm a father of two. And at the time I was just newly a father of two, or my wife was very pregnant. I'm not sure which one. Depends on where in the timeline, but it doesn't matter. I was a father at least, and I had 15 years of, experience with children's mental health. And I had my friends telling me that 12-year-olds should be allowed to join certain groups in school without the parents being informed. And I said, well, I disagree with you, because actually parents are responsible for their children up until 18 years old. And if they want to join a gay group or a straight group or a lesbian group or whatever group, as a parent, to help my child as best I can, I should know about that. And again, they got mad at me for my statement on that. And it was like, this is not a controversial statement. This is not something that is really up for debate. The parent is absolutely responsible for their children. If your kid breaks somebody's windows, the police are going to be saying, listen, dude, your kid should know better and you should probably pay for those windows. And I don't know if they could make you pay for the windows, but you know, it's one of those things. And communication from school to parent is very important. And so I just thought it was kind of funny that all of these people who weren't parents, who had no history of working in schools, which I do, no history of understanding children's mental health issues, which again I do, were trying to tell me things that I knew to be false were helpful, and the things that I thought were not helpful. And I thought, man, I don't know what else there is to say to you guys. Like I'm trying to be honest with you. I'm trying to tell you why. And at a certain point, it's diminishing returns. And it was, so my channel was anonymous because I didn't want feedback from people who knew me, because I wasn't interested in their feedback, because it was more about an outlet for me than it was about making them happy, right? I wasn't interested in making them happy. I was more interested in putting something out there that was authentic and seeing what other people thought about it. Am I crazy? If I'm crazy, I'll take that. Okay, if everybody thinks I'm abhorrent and nuts, okay, then I need to deal with that. The problem is me. But that's not what happened. And the more I talk and the more I put my arguments together and the more I call it composing, and like when I compose my videos, and the more I do that, the more I chop the wood. And chopping the wood is figuring out what I'm going to put in my video. And when I've got it all together, I compose it by going through the tabs and making sure I know what I want to say about each one, or have an idea of what I want to say, because I don't script myself. I just talk. But it was never about making them happy. It was never about putting something out that satisfied any niche other than politics. I wanted to talk about politics, what was happening in Canada. And you know, because I loved Colbert and I loved Jon Stewart. I loved the structure of those shows, and the skits I could take or leave, you know, when they'd go, and I liked the interviews sometimes, but when they'd go and we're on location, and you know, the skits were funny, but the best part was the first 15 minutes where Stewart or Colbert would look at the news, deadpan to the camera, and be like, can you fucking believe this shit? Because no, it's incredibly crazy, right? And all of that stuff is happening in Canada. And I was like, why? Why isn't anybody talking about this? So it was never meant to push an ideology. It was never meant to say left is correct or right is correct or this or that. I tell my audience, you guys, my bias, only because I want you to be aware of my bias, because I'm aware of my bias. I know that I like certain policies and I don't like other ones, and I'm going to cover it with that bias. But other than that, I just wanted to say, this is what's happening. Can you believe this? Like,
yeah, Canadian politics has gotten substantially more interesting than it was a while ago. And like you said, there's so many characters and there's so much going on that people aren't covering it. We're all talking about stuff happening in the States, which is great. But because a lot of it, you know, in the UK and the States, it trickles over here. It's important to keep an eye out. But there's no shortage. There's no shortage of dumpster fire coverage in Canada at all. Now, speaking of dumpster fire, I do want to talk about how both of us did at one point, admittedly, because we're intellectually honest. We did vote for Trudeau. There's a question in the comments that I think segues nicely into that.
Sure.
Jamesy Anubis asks, doesn't Canada Poly wanting to know his leader's personality, this is back when you talked about Max, more base his voting decision on more cult of personality than on actual policy? And I know kind of where you stand on that because I've watched your videos and I know you're a big fan of the policy as well. But because we're talking now about sort of the personal attributes of the leader, you know, himself, I thought maybe that was a nice segue. So if you can answer the question as to what you meant, I guess, by wanting to see Max kind of in action, talking, debating, long form, that kind of thing. Is that about his personality? What is your support for the People's Party, and is it based on Max, I guess, is kind of the big question. And then I'm gonna grill you about Trudeau.
Sure. I didn't know who Maxime Bernier was before last summer, before he started tweeting the 6 multicultural tweets that got him the attention and ire of Andrew Scheer. If you go back and look at my show last year, I was okay with Andrew Scheer. I was like, yeah, Andrew Scheer's fine. Like June, July of last year, I was like, dude, the dimples, what's wrong with, like, you got to stop smiling. But other than that, you know, he was all right. And I really started getting into the difference between, well, I really started looking at the Conservatives more closely in July, August, coming up to their convention. And then the more, well, I mean, you can go back to last summer and watch the evolution of me going, is this seriously all that they're offering? What are the Conservatives doing? What are they doing? And I was so frustrated with the complete inaction. I mean, Trudeau was fiddling while Canada burned, and he's still doing the same thing. The reference to Nero, right? The Roman emperor who burned while Rome, or who fiddled while Rome burned. It's the same problem. And the issue is Andrew Scheer has been, I mean, there have been other people than me calling him weak for a long time, but it was having the opposition fail so miserably, so consistently. I was frustrated. And again, you can go through and watch the shows. And then Maxime Bernier started tweeting, and I was like, wonderful, the Conservatives have life, right? And in July 18th, I think it was, I'll have to check, but July 18th, I think, is the day. Michelle Rempel did the Conservative press conference on what they would do with immigration were they to form government, right? So this is the shadow minister, Michelle Rempel's the shadow minister, and she was doing a big announcement. And I covered it really closely. I broke down the speech, and this was a speech, I said, where she's giving temporary foreign workers a path to citizenship. And my problem with that was we haven't fixed any of the immigration problems that Trudeau has messed up. Trudeau has taken a sledgehammer to our immigration system, and it needs some serious TLC. We need to really have a hard look at it and really, really, I don't know about fundamentally changing it. That's what the Liberals are trying to do. But we need to, if we want it to continue to work, it needs to be looked at very seriously. And my frustration with Andrew Scheer was he wasn't willing to do that. And Andrew Scheer through Michelle Rempel. That's what got me blocked by Michelle Rempel. Thank you, Michelle. And which is fine, right? My questions, I think, were legitimate, and I wasn't trolling her. They were legitimate questions. Why is the CPC not looking at the Global Compact for Migration? At the time I did a 20-episode deep dive into the Global Compact 10 days before it was signed, December 1st to 10th and 11th of December in 2018. That's all on Global Compact on migration, because it was such a hot button issue. Andrew Scheer didn't start talking about it until 3 days before it was signed on the 11th. Incredible. So my PPC support is, I think Max is a very charismatic leader. I think he probably, if the ballots were not destroyed, we would maybe have something to look at after the leadership race for the CPC. But it wasn't Maxime Bernier that had me, like the cult or the personality of Maxime Bernier that had me going to his party. I wasn't a big Max acolyte. It was the tweets, and then the honesty, really, like the ability for him to say, this is what I think and this is why I think it, and I'm not going to pander like Andrew Scheer, and I'm not going to tell you lies like Justin Trudeau. So yeah, I mean, if that personality is what you're talking about, then yes, I am a Max fan. But ultimately it was a political journey that had me deciding that why can't Andrew Scheer denounce globalism? Why can't Andrew Scheer talk about the fact that the UN shouldn't be putting or choosing where and how many refugees and all of those things that are being shoehorned in because of the Global Compact on migration? Why isn't Andrew Scheer strongly fighting against those things? And I know he said he'd remove Canada from the UN Global Compact, et cetera, but not to say I don't believe him, but why do half measures when Mr. Bernier is talking about taking full control of Canada's sovereignty, period, right? Removing it from the UN entirely. And yeah, so policy, personality, but policy first.
Yeah, for sure. I'm in the same boat. I mean, the platform itself, I've never felt like I actually really align with an entire majority of the policies in a party. And it's nice to have these policies in place that are just so common sense. They really are beneficial for all Canadians. It's not specifically conservative values. There's stuff in there for everyone, including people that are low income, better tax policies, simplifying tax policies, all of it. It's really fantastic, especially for rural Canadians, Western Canadians. I'm a big fan of Max, like you said, in the sense that he has shown, charisma, and he's a little more, charming, sure, but that's not the reason that I'm in the party or why I'm running. It's about the fact that personality type shows not just a personality, it shows integrity. It shows more than that. It shows the willingness to speak up despite the risk to you, despite, getting crapped all over, essentially. And I think so many of us are sick of the BS and sick of the political correctness that it's just very refreshing to have someone say, you know what? I'm going to stand by what I believe in, even though ultimately I'm going to have to leave my party for it. Because really, the mainstream parties, they've got a hold on each of their MPs. They've got a hold on them around their neck, saying you have to follow this party line. You can believe what you want, but you're going to vote this way. You see that with pro-life and pro-choice issues in the Liberal Party. Sure, if you're grandfathered in as a pro-lifer, fine, but don't you dare vote, for pro-life. You have to vote against it, right? So it's one of those things where I really appreciate that Max is willing to let his MPs and his candidates have freedom of expression and have their own beliefs. And I don't know who I spoke with. I think it was Frank Vaughan that said, yeah, he takes a risk. No, it wasn't Frank Vaughan. I don't remember who this was. Very recently, he said he takes a risk in having all of these people across the country with their own opinions. That's very risky, liability-wise for the party. But it also shows an important point, which is freedom of thought and association and belief and religion and all of that. So it's a huge part and parcel. And we will talk about the PPC right before we finish up the show. But really quickly, because I'm always fascinated to meet someone else that also voted for Trudeau and has completely walked away from that. I have yet to meet anybody that voted for him or who in any capacity, really, that actually likes Trudeau. It's a pretty safe bet everywhere I go that nobody likes what he's doing, including a lot of leftists. He's pissed off a lot of people in a lot of realms and a lot of camps. But I'm always curious because I got a lot of flack when I first started my channel because I openly admitted that I was more liberal, and people saying, oh, you're not a real conservative. Oh, you're actually a Trudeau plant and all these different things. And if you're that stupid and blah, blah, blah. And I've explained my position. I came from a very unique position when I voted for Trudeau, partly just naivety and being uneducated, partly just being in the leftist camp on disability, surrounded by the victim mentality. And it's really easy when you're living on Vancouver Island around those people to become a little different in your mindset. So I'm just curious, what was your story? Why Trudeau, and what made you change your mind?
Yeah, well, I was always left-leaning. My dad is or was a bus driver, and my mom was a a registered nurse she worked in old folks' homes. My mom was a union steward. I remember when I was growing up, people would come over to our house to talk to my mom about their job. And, my mom had to help them with negotiating the union contract or whatever. And so I grew up around people in helping professions, right? My dad was a bus driver. My mom was a helping nurse. And, I don't know how open to be. No, I'll leave that one. That's fine. So my family we often had borders when I was young we live in Guelph, right? So there's a university here. We would often have students living in our basement in order to make the housing prices work, right? Because it was hard to have a house. My parents had a house. And my dad commuted to Mississauga to work and whatever. And this is a really long way to go to say I'm really left, right? Or I was really left. I was raised in a very lefty household. My job was essentially how are you going to help people in the world? That's what your job is supposed to do, right? And so I grew up and I became a union steward, and I worked in a mental health facility in a school that relied on government funding that is, reliant on these liberal style policies, right? Or the tax and spend and whatever. So me voting Justin Trudeau is not that far out of character if you look at the trajectory of my adult life, right? If you look at what I've done as an adult, even as a kid too, what I grew up around, it's shocking, not to me because I experienced it, because the reality of the world's hard, but it's shocking how far I've moved in the spectrum. I still fundamentally believe that there is room and necessary conversation for a lot of the points on the left. But at the same time, we've gone way, way too far, and it's time to get back to basics. Let's see. Well, I don't want to get, I was going to do an analogy, but I don't want to get into it. So yeah, being a Justin Trudeau supporter was easy because everybody around me pretty much supported Justin Trudeau. It was in Ontario, which went almost all red, right? Very rural areas went blue, but a lot of red in Ontario. And so all of that said, my dad and I got into a very, very heated conversation at, I think it was New Year's Eve, and I drank too much. These things happen. I don't drink so much anymore, but I drank too much and we got into an argument. And the argument was essentially Justin Trudeau's an idiot, said my dad. And I said, no, he's not. He's doing politics differently, Dad.
It sounds like the conversation with my dad. You're not really a liberal. Yes, I am. He knew it. He knew it.
Yeah, he knew. So I will say publicly and with my face to the camera, Dad, you were right, 100% right. And I was wrong, very, very wrong. And unfortunately, Canada has suffered for it. It's terrible. And I wish that I was right and he was wrong. But I admit freely that I was spectacularly wrong in my defense of the potato-headed imbecile, Justin Trudeau.
I was spectacularly wrong. It's going to go on a gravestone for me at some days. I was spectacularly wrong about the potato-headed Trudeau. Yeah, isn't that the truth? When you're in a position of wanting to, you work in a very compassionate industry. And like you said, when you're surrounded by certain belief systems and voting patterns, like I was living on Vancouver Island. I wasn't living on Vancouver Island, but I had just moved back and was still I was visiting out there and chatting with my friends who are actually NDP out there. Trudeau was considered, too far right, I guess, for them. I don't know.
That's way on the center. He wants.
Yeah, whoa, center, I don't know, it was a whole different ball game. So yeah, you definitely get into that idea that this is compassionate, this is compassionate, this is compassionate. And when compassion is, driven into your head by yourself and by others for so long, or your industry, I myself, I've always defined myself as sort of a bleeding heart. I do want to help others. And you've been told for so long that the conservative, way of doing things is just about rich people and businesses, and they don't care about the little guy. And Justin Trudeau is going to care. And it's like, well, no, he's actually an elitist trust fund kid. But I didn't do enough research at the time. I wasn't doing politics at the time, really, right?
It didn't matter. The whole press was against Harper. Justin Trudeau could do no. He literally said Canadians have no culture.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't know. And people shared that on Facebook at the time, and I ignored it. And like, not the weaponization. In Ontario right now, Doug Ford is awful, right? They're trying to do to him what they did to Mike Harris, what they're doing to Trump, what they're going to try and do to Bernier, right? Like this make it abhorrent. What they're doing to the mega hats, right? Equating them with Ku Klux Klan headscarves and like the Ku Klux Klan white hood or whatever they use. I don't know. And I think that's interesting, right? They're trying to completely make it unacceptable to have any viewpoint but liberal, right? If you don't vote for the carbon tax, despite the fact that it doesn't work, despite the fact that it doesn't reduce emissions, despite the fact that it doesn't do what it says it's going to do, if you don't like the carbon tax, you're anti-science, or climate change denying, whatever, conservative, fill in the blank. I've had a 2-day long conversation with somebody on my Facebook that, and I don't know. Do I know the climate is changing? Sure. Climate is definitely different than it was when I was a kid, but it was different 30 years before that and 30 years before that and 30 years before that. I don't think any 2 years are exactly the same. So is the climate changing? Yes, the climate is changing. Are humans causing it? I don't know. And I don't think anybody else knows. And I think that it's irresponsible to push this, especially when you're pushing basically an end of the world cult theory. And anybody who says, well, hold on a second, there are scientists out there who say maybe not. So there's a conversation to be had on this. And certainly what is definitely positively certain is that taxes do not change what the weather is going to do. And that's proven, like since 2008 to now, I believe anyway, 2016, and I don't know about the last 2 years, but till 2008 to 2016, BC has had a carbon tax, and it has not reduced emissions. They, in fact, have produced more emissions than the Canadian average most years, I think 7 out of 10. So it doesn't work. Why are we allowing people to claim that wanting to have this conversation is somehow negative? Like, the only way to solve a problem is to identify the problem and then identify the answers that aren't going to solve the problem. And tax is one of those answers. It's not going to solve the effing problem. So, yeah.
Well, fair enough. That's a reasonable rant, because it really isn't. It's just going to hurt a lot of the most vulnerable people.
Right.
And people that are, oh, I got some money back. Yeah, you got a little money back because you're going to spend a lot. And if they have to give you money back in order to tax you, there's something a little fishy going on. I don't know. People are so blind to it. But what's interesting, and this again ties into, I like when interviews go like this, when they tie into the next topic automatically, and I don't have to do it myself very creatively. You're saying like you're automatically labeled as a climate change denier, you're labeled as uneducated, stupid. If it's about immigration, you're labeled as a bigot, you're labeled as a racist, a xenophobe, etc. So there's always the worst case scenario that they assume about the person when it comes to talking to leftists or the media or people who are more left leaning. They just assume the worst about you, and that's caused a lot of division in this country, right? Because nobody's listening, because they assume that you don't care about the environment then, and I don't care about the environment. Well, on the contrary, I'm kind of a tree hugger conservationist and a stickler about recycling, and I do everything I can in my power to reduce my footprint, but I don't believe in the carbon change stuff. I'm more worried about palatable issues, or not pardon me, what's the word I'm looking for? Tangible, thank you, tangible issues, like waterways and the cleanliness of our water, our air, companies that are polluting. That to me is far more concerning than the climate change carbon tax thing.
Here's a crazy little story for you. Okay, so prior to plastics becoming ubiquitous, right? It used to be Coke came in glass bottles, right? A lot of glass bottles. And then the blue box came in. And this gave the license to Coke companies to make single-use, Coke companies, soda companies, whatever, single-use plastic bottles, right? Except recycling doesn't work. Recycling doesn't do anything. Calgary has giant stacks of plastics in cubes that can't be sent to other parts of the world to be processed anymore. Processed, read like it's tax money, right? Like the blue bin has a certain amount of, I read this story the other day. The blue bin had like a $5 tax to it. So like the citizenry pays $5 each, and that tax was supposed to kickstart the recycling business. And basically what it became was a moving plastics around business, right? And I don't know if you've heard the story of the garbage in the Canadian garbage in the Philippines. Have you heard this? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been hearing about that. Yeah.
Right. So that's one of these, some recycling plastic person. And I did videos on this, but some like the company bought the plastic to send to, they did what they were supposed to do, except the plastic is garbage and it doesn't actually get reprocessed. It just gets dealt with, let's just say, right? But all of that stuff is being, now that those pathways are closed, all of the plastics are just being stacked up in Canada and different places. Calgary is one. I saw a picture when I was doing the research. I was just reading about it, and I was like, "Wow, that's crazy." So, all of the recycling stuff is expensive and doesn't, again, do what it says, do what they say it was going to do, right? Like
I've been learning about that a lot recently too. How much of it just gets sort of thrown in a landfill anyway, and that it's a losing business, and that that's a whole other discussion. But that would be an interesting one. That'd be an interesting one to do a whole topic on.
Right, but here's the funny thing. Okay, so like if your government says to you in 1990, right, we're going to do X and we're going to check it out and make sure that the data backs up what we did, right? So we're going to bring in a blue bin, and then we're going to let all the companies do single-use plastic bottles. And what's supposed to happen is the taxes from the blue bin are supposed to process the plastic bottles back into plastic bottles to be reused. Great. We've been doing it for 20 years. Is it working? No. Is our landfills filling up? Yes. Is the Pacific garbage patch filling up? Yes. What are we doing? Well, let's just let them keep up with the plastic bottles because we've developed an industry around it, and let's not do anything about it. What in the world are you thinking? Like, it's crazy, right? Like, and so, yes, I have a frustration when people are screaming about CO2, screaming about all this trash that is very muddy, and it's purposely muddy. And when you've got something like this, that we being adults, human adults in Canada, made a change that have now meaningfully increased the plastics, and we're not willing to even look at changing it back. And using glass bottles and saying, well, this is, notice all that plastic out there? No, why? So that bears the question, why? Is there no political will? If there's political will, why isn't it done?
Yeah, if Catherine McKenna cares so much about the environment, why are we not focusing on the things that I believe are the biggest culprits of causing major issues, health issues, chemical stuff, all of it. These are the things that we need to actually focus on, not, like you said, CO2 emissions. I'm going to kind of, because we're getting to just past the hour mark, if you're okay to go for another 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll close her down. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure. Let me just double check my email, make sure nothing's blown up.
Sure, that
You know,
makes sense. I'm going to check the chat quick. There's a few questions I don't think we're probably going to get to, but I will address them because maybe they're things that you might want to do a video on, or maybe I might want to do a video on as well.
sure.
But I do want to just give you an opportunity because you are a member of the PPC, you're a member of the EDA. I had someone earlier ask if you took, first of all, did you take your yellow vest off on your profile because you're involved with the PPC? That was one question. I'll get that one
I
out
took
first.
it off. Yeah, I noticed. So I took it off the day before I was going to do an online town hall because I had heard that my excuse me, I had heard that my voice was that recognizable. So what I noticed in the days leading up to the first online town hall was that there was an increase in yellow vest reporting in Canada, tying the yellow vests to white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I had put my yellow vest up originally, it was in solidarity with the Parisian yellow vests who it was, Act 1, Act 2 when I first did it. And I said, man, like, I mean, you can go back and watch my videos back then. And I can't remember, November of last year, maybe. And when I was talking about it, because it was a protest against Macron, and Macron is, or Marcon, as I was calling him then, Macron. But it was a fundamentally, they tried to pass it off as a gas price protest. And then Macron backed down on that and talked about how he was going to, they weren't going to increase the gas prices, and the protest just grew. And so I was covering this from the beginning. But what I didn't want to have happen was to have my association that I put up like that misrepresented to be aligned with some kind of white supremacy, regardless of whether it's made up or not. I mean, if the press can use a thread of truth, is the profile the same one, or is the profile yellow vest? Yes, then he's a white supremacist. They could spin that, and they've been putting they've been doing the work, the groundwork to make sure that has weight, right? Like if they printed a story that said that, and a lay person, somebody who doesn't know all the stuff or what's happening in the world of media these days, and they read that, like a low information voter, and they read that and they say, oh, that guy's a white supremacist, right? So it was a calculated change, because at this point in time, the news is trying to vilify people like that. And I had somebody reach out to me and say, like, here's a bunch of branding, and I really like what you do. And so I had the tools at hand to quickly make the change. And so I'm not meaning to be disrespectful or anything to that effect to anybody. It's more a calculated move to make sure that I'm not misrepresented.
No, fair enough. And I mean, you always risk being misrepresented in our position anyway, but it's nice to, like you said, you don't want to go back. Like you're not saying you don't support the original impetus of the movement. That's where I'm at too. I very much support the people that are doing what was originally intended to be done. It has sort of turned into a fiasco, and it's been taken over by various groups that I really just don't agree with. And it just became such a mess, right? For me, it was, I worked on Saturdays. I only attended one rally. And for me, it was a matter of, okay, we all need to try to be active and do something to fight for the things we believe in. What are the best ways that I can use my energy, my time? And for me, it was diving into the PPC and looking at it from more of a policy and building a party perspective. And other people do the yellow vest thing. And I think to all the power to anybody who's going ahead and fighting for what they believe in, and doing the best they can amid all the chaos and the people trying to sabotage movements and all that stuff, right? So given that, we're talking about the PPC, would you like to, by chance, chat about your newer updates on what's going on with you and the party?
Yeah, well, I mean, I am a candidate in Guelph, and that's exciting. There's been some newspaper articles about me, and that's cool, and that's interesting to do. And I'm hopeful that I can move the Overton window, right? Like the Overton window is the acceptable conversation. And what they do is they try and close it down, right? And I'm doing a very bad job with my hands here to explain it, but it's, look up the Overton window and you can see it's got like right, left, and 4 squares and a square that just kind of closes. And as the square closes, the acceptable dialogue reduces and reduces and reduces. And what Maxime Bernier did when he started tweeting about the immigration policies, et cetera, is open the Overton window back to 250,000 or less, to quote Maxime Bernier. And at the time, Well, the Liberals are pushing for 450,000 a year. That's what they would like. It's at 330,000 people now. Plus, I mean, there's other sources as well. Student visas don't count to that number, and certain other work visas don't count. And there's all sorts of other numbers. But fundamentally, Mr. Bernier, with his tweets, dragged the conversation back to the right, and that is necessary. You cannot have the conversation be completely dominated by radical leftists and even moderate leftists. You can't, and the conversation doesn't actually move forward if the conversation is only between radical and moderate leftists, because those policies aren't sustainable, as we've seen the last couple of years. $1 billion just on illegal border crossers. These are not asylum seekers or refugees. These are people crossing from the safe country of the United States into Canada. And we spent $1 billion in 2018 processing these people. That's $540 million across all of Canada, and then $200 million in Canada. And that does not include education or healthcare. That is just housing. Education would cost a lot if it was factored in, but it is not. So 200 million in Ontario and 200 million in Quebec. Without factoring in Manitoba, that's $1 billion. We don't have the money. It's unbudgeted. They budgeted they being the Liberal government, budgeted $172 million in 2018 over 2 years, and they spent $1 billion. So what I'm hoping to do is have that conversation and tell people, this is what your government is doing. Do you want them to do that? And I think the answer was going to be no. That's what I think.
Right on. No, it's kind of interesting because I've been asked that question with, like, say, Mark Freeze, and people say, are you using your platform because you're now a candidate? Are you going to be, are you doing that because you just have a platform? And I mean, yes, to some extent there is an extra platform, but it's not a platform for personal gain. I'm trying to explain it's a platform to express ideas. And because the ideas I have already lined up so beautifully with the policies of the People's Party, it does become a way to just, like you said, get the damn conversation going, because that's ultimately what Max did. He opened up sort of a storm on Twitter and elsewhere of people having to face the fact that this conversation needs to be had. And even though a lot of people, pushed back and were angry or triggered by it, ultimately it's out there now. We have to talk about it. And ultimately we are being, as a people, as a nation, very much lied to. There's a lot that's being withheld from the general public. You have to dig to find the facts. You have to do what we're doing. You don't just, wake up, go to work, go on Facebook and see all of the real news that's relevant, that's from the proper perspective. You get one perspective, you get one or two different types of articles, and that's it. And it's very, very sad. So for me, it's about waking people up to truth, letting them decide for themselves. But ultimately, I'm just tired of the division in our country, and so much of it is sown by, like, the media and by propaganda. And we need more voices out there speaking towards truth and some sort of, recognition that we're not really against each other as Canadians. It's always been the people against the elites. And to me, the CPC is no better in that respect than the Liberals. So I like Max and the People's Party of Canada because it is a principled way of moving forward, and it's something that I believe and value-wise. So it becomes this sort of crossover between my channel and this endeavor. And they're so similar because my goal was the same either way, right? I don't know if you kind of feel the same way, like you're wanting to do something good in the world. Well, you can do it in both directions. I am going to we didn't get much into free speech. I did have someone in the chat, might have been Jesus Gonzalez, who I think has headed out, but wanted to know what people should be doing to guard free speech. Now, you had said earlier, your words are your weapons and you should use them carefully. I agree with that. I think ultimately free speech is only as good as, not in the sense of the legal sense, I'm a free speech absolutist, but when it comes to trying to get your point across, you do have to recognize what your words sound like to people. You do have to recognize the reality of how you'll be taken. And I think that people who spend a couple minutes thinking about it before they just blurt out whatever's on their mind usually get further when they're trying to change minds. But that being said, I'm very concerned about people just getting shut down altogether because of hate speech and all this. Where do you stand on that? Any thoughts on what we can all do just as regular citizens that maybe aren't going to run for a party like you or me? What can people do to fight this? Because it is getting really scary. And as we know, freedom of speech is, the foundation of so many other freedoms, and people take it way for granted.
Yeah. That's a tough question. It's a hard one to answer. I asked the same of Mr. Bernier and the panel. I was at the political correctness panel, and I asked them, like, how do you fight the weaponization of your friends and your family. You know, like family, they don't want to talk with me about politics. You know, they don't want to talk with me so much. Now that I'm a candidate, it's a kind of a different story. But before that, it was like you don't want to. They don't want to talk to me about that. And it would be a divisive topic. It would be a topic that would start a fight or would start a, you know, people would get upset. And right or wrong, you know, people understand this. People identify with their political belief. They become their political belief. So when you're attacking it, when you say a liberal blah blah blah, or you know, if you're trying to say that group of people that you don't like are doing something you don't like, and if that person that you're talking to identifies as that group too, a liberal, right, then oftentimes they'll get their back up because you're attacking them inadvertently, even if you don't realize it, because they're identifying with themselves with that party, right? And it's a team sport, if you will. You do it too, regardless of whether you realize you do. It's your bias. It's your inherent bias. I do it too. Everybody does it. And it's the reason that you log back into Facebook to finish that fight. It's the reason that you get on that keyboard and you type and you type and you type, because they have to understand your point. Because if you cede the point, that part of you has to die, right? And that sounds really dire, right? But you have to be willing to let it go, right? Because if it's not true anymore, you can't reference it, right? You can't say that thing's true. That thing that you believe is no longer true. So you have to get rid of it somehow. And it's not easy to get rid of that belief. It doesn't matter if it's true or not, because it's true to you and you've built other things around that truth, right? If that's not true, what else isn't true? So when you're attacking that person and you understand that they're personalizing it, you are fundamentally attacking their built up reality. And even if you're right, even if you can show them 100% I'm right and you're wrong, they will reject what you're saying, because a lot of other things depend on that one thing being true. It's like the base and other things piled on top. And if you remove that base, everything else is going to come crumbling down. And that is scary to a lot of people. I walked away from a group of friends that I spend a lot of my adult life with. And it wasn't because I was angry with them. And it wasn't because I wanted more from them. And it wasn't because any of those reasons, other than there wasn't anything more to say, right? They thought one thing and I thought the other thing. And I wasn't going to dislodge that base, that thing that they have everything built up around. It wasn't going to move. If that moved, then everything else comes crumbling down. So they weren't willing to give that up for me. And that's okay. That's okay. And the journey I went on was that base collapsed and everything else collapsed. And I said, if that's not true and that's not true, what is true? And I went on my journey, and that's my journey. That's why I do my show. What's true? Is this true? This is our Canadian world. This is what's happening. This is as true as it gets. And that's my lens, right? So that's the advice I can give you. Understand that in order to move forward, they need to re-examine everything. And it takes time, like a long time. It took me years. And I'm still not done. And I'm still looking around going, is this true? How true is this? Let's talk about it. Let's figure this out. Right. So that's,
yeah, no, it's a long process, right? That it's for me, it's like I said, I took the time release red pill, not the quick acting. It was, you know, there's always little aha moments where I think, holy cow, is this really going on? Holy cow, what's going on? It's surprising sometimes how much, you know, how deep the brainwashing goes, I guess you could say. And it's just, you know, you have to imagine that around the country as people are just not looking at this the same way that we are. Like you said, if you have to dismantle one belief, you've got to dismantle a whole bunch of them. And if you say, okay, well, maybe I was wrong on this one thing, suddenly you realize, okay, I was wrong on a whole bunch of things. And that's pretty scary. That's a pretty scary feeling. It's very overwhelming. And a lot of people, if they're not really self-growth oriented or don't have the time or desire to reflect, they're not going to do it. They're just going to double down, you know, dig their heels in and move on from there. But freedom of speech is something I didn't think about at all until pretty much, like you said, Jordan Peterson earlier. He's the one that kind of made me stop and think, wait a second, why is he so mad about this? What's the big deal? Oh, so they want us to say, you know, pronouns. What's the big deal, right? And now it's like, oh, okay, it's a really big deal because this is the slippery slope into tyranny, really, because as soon as someone decides that this is hate speech or this is not, who's that person? Why do they get to decide, right? And that's a very scary, very, very scary thing. And I don't know why more people don't see that, but I guess they're just not seeing it in this light, I guess. I don't know.
Well, and the other thing to consider, you're right as well, but the other thing to consider is, even if they do want to allow that part of themselves to go, you know, if they want to have that collapse and go through that struggle too, they will get pushback from their friends and from their family. The amount of people who reached out to me because I was saying what Trump's doing is not what the news is saying he's doing. Like, what the news is saying he's doing is something that's very different than what is actually happening on the ground. Like, and people would say all of the talking points that I'd hear on CNN and I would, or, you know, like, that are bandying about Twitter or, you know, whatever's in the zeitgeist of the moment, right? You get all that stuff back the second you say something that's remotely Trump positive, right? Like, ooh, wow, get him. And so that's interesting, right? Like, if you start to say maybe the conservatives aren't so bad, maybe the PPC is a party that is going to do well this year, all of a sudden, you know, you're deplorable, you're a you know, whatever they are, and a racist, a white supremacist, an Islamophobe, anti-feminist, more and more and more. I told my EDA, get your armor on, right? We're going to be called all sorts of names. So, you know, these people who you're talking to, even if you do break through, even if you do collapse that base, even if you do take off one chair from the top of their little palace for them to re-examine the chair, they're going to experience pushback from their friends and relatives. And that's something that only they can get through. Only they can make the choice. You know, only they can take the next step, because sometimes it does take saying, okay, I'll see you, you know, and not hard feelings, not anything like that. Just, you know, what else is there to say? Sorry, guys. You know, like,
yeah, you can only go so far. It is what it is,
yeah,
right? You can't,
right.
you can lead a horse to water. You can't make him drink, as the
right.
old saying. And many of these old expressions that my parents used that I thought were so lame, damn, they're true. Hey, I hate when that happens. But
Yeah,
they were right about a lot of things, turns out. Well, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
You know, there's a couple comments in the, I won't get into them. They're too big, but there's two things that I wanted to acknowledge in the comments section. One was a concern about wondering your opinion. These are things maybe you could do some videos on, or maybe we'll do a follow-up chat. But one was about, you know, the issue with equalization in Quebec, kind of the massive amount of division going on between the West and the East, the fact that it seems like some politicians are almost pushing for more division. That's a big concern with the PPC. Like, how are we going to handle that? What are our views? So I would recommend maybe doing a video on that if you were ever interested at some point. I think that's too big to get into, but if you have something brief to say, by all means.
Yeah, I just want to understand the context. I think the PPC is pushing the conversation to, or the Liberals are going to.
Specifically, this is from a while back. I mean, I know I've seen a lot of politicians that are kind of complaining one way or the other. I think they're more wondering, yeah, like, are we going to try to make, because I think this person was moving back to Quebec, and she was basically saying that, you know, she doesn't want there to be so much hatred against the Quebec people. So what she's worried about is, say, people like Bernier talking about how it's unfair that Quebec is receiving all these perks, which it is. It's almost like it's going against the citizens as opposed to the government that created the policy.
I see. Yeah, okay.
I think that's where she's coming from. She can correct me if I'm wrong.
When I talk about that kind of stuff, I think we use the social license for oil. Okay, so oftentimes when people talk about Quebec politics, they're talking about the politicians, what the politicians say. But what the politicians say and what the people say are different things. The politicians say there's no social license for Canadian oil in Quebec, right? But the people say different. So when I'm talking about when I'm talking about equalization and talking, and Bernier, I guess, has different talking points than I do, but when I'm talking about equalization, I talk about the need for a fair system, and the system currently isn't fair. It counts hydroelectric as it doesn't count hydroelectric as a renewable resource, or as a resource to be used, and it does count oil. So that's the reason for, well, I did a video on it about equalization on Canada Poly, if you want to watch that. But the reason why Quebec pays, or maybe I did it on my local channel, so I apologize if it's not on Canada Poly, but I definitely did one recently. And the reason for the discrepancy, and it's a huge discrepancy for Quebec. They have like 13 billion. They just got 2 more billion, and Ontario just lost all of the funding, which is 2.5 billion. So they just got all of the equalization that Ontario was getting. So that's not fair, because the formula isn't applied evenly across the country, and the formula itself isn't fair. And so it's nothing to do with Quebec, the citizenry of Quebec. I think it's more playing politics. And I think that the idea of setting up economic situations for each province to increase their own riches and resources for development is the better plan. Why are we saying, yeah, let's take all of Alberta's oil and sell it at a discount and then redistribute all their money? Ha ha ha, that'll make Alberta work really hard to give us all their money. Like, it seems so weird. Like, we have resources in Ontario, we have resources in Quebec. We could send our resources from Alberta to the east and stop spending $300 million a month on Saudi oil, right? Like, does that make sense to anybody else watching? It made sense to me. And I think that, again, the Overton window, the conversation, the acceptable conversation from politicians has been closed to acceptable Canadian oil. But it's okay to spend $300 million a month on Saudi oil that has none of the environmental protections, that is not nearly as clean as Canadian oil, like, and that has to travel across an ocean in an oil tanker. Like, what, are you seriously an environmentalist and picketing Canadian oil? Get your head out of your, right? Come on. So,
yeah, very true.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that I think it transcends the people. I think the people in Quebec are as frustrated as the people of Ontario and the people of Eastern Canada who are sending their money to Saudi Arabia, right?
Well, you know what? I'm actually impressed. You answered that question really quickly. So I'm happy to say that I think you actually checked that box off. I'm not great for brevity, so I'm impressed when someone can answer something in under 5 minutes. Well done.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll end it on a lighter note.
Sure.
Faye Knox is in the chat. Faye is someone that's been watching my channel since, pretty much the beginning. She's been a fantastic supporter of pretty much all of our kind of conservative populist type YouTube channels. She is a CPCer, and we've, agreed to disagree on that front and respect each other's choice.
I have one too.
Yeah, her big concern is supply management. Now, this is an issue when I talk about rural Canadians in Saskatchewan. Supply management's not going to be as hot button of a topic just because of the type of agriculture we have here. We are largely cereal crops, and I'm really looking forward to getting out, knocking doors, talking to our rural community, getting question and answer town hall nights. I really want to know what the concerns are here and how I can help our farmers. I'm from a farm background. It's very important to me. Supply management being a really hot button topic, obviously something Maxime Bernier talks about a lot, particularly with dairy farmers, not as big a thing out here. Do you have any ideas? I know she's very worried about big companies coming in, big farms taking over family farms, worried that it's going to have an opposite effect on our economy and our farmers. So that's something, if you want to dive in, great. If not, then maybe a separate video would be
oh yeah, I got to answer that question. Okay, the big farms taking over family farms is happening now with the quota system that we have in place. The quota system is way too expensive. If I wanted to get into farming right now, I'd need $1 million, right? Quota costs, what's the quota cost? She knows, she probably knows. I don't know what the quota costs, but it's enough to be prohibitive to a small business trying to get started. There are countless farms, there are countless products is not the right word. Whatever's made from farms, like the excess, I guess products is fine. Products that aren't managed by supply management. And those farmers can export their goods into the United States if Mr. Trump is feeling so inclined, and to other countries too. And that increases your potential market, right? The way things are, we have a closed market that is governed by the supply management system. And so I understand the hesitation on it, but like the hesitation on changing the supply management system. But if you look at New Zealand and Australia, they took 15 years, and I think it was 9 billion. I think I did a video on it last year, but it was around $9 billion to do the whole transition from a quota system to an open market. And the open market now is, I think, comparable to our supply managed system for cost currently. But that's not necessarily the point. The point is, if you can open your markets and have bigger, more access to other markets, you could potentially make more money, right? Like, there's a lot of border towns that could be selling into the United States for their milk, et cetera, et cetera. And any milk coming into Canada, because I'll get to why I think this is an important aspect in just a second, but any milk coming into Canada would have to meet our standards, right? You couldn't get US milk with hormones. It would have to meet Canadian standards if milk was coming into the country. I've heard that concern, and I just want to talk to it. But the reason for getting rid of supply management is not just to have cheap milk. It's to open up the trade with the United States. Donald Trump has talked at length about what he needs to get rid of the aluminum and steel tariffs. Part of what he needs is access to the milk market. So during the renegotiation of the USMCA last year, Donald Trump said very clearly, well, at the end of the G7, he wants milk. He basically asked for the same percentage that was given to the TPP, 3.5%. What he got was 2.75%, I think, because Justin Trudeau is terrible. But because he just has to be like that with Trump. But
yeah, fair enough.
But the point is, it's not about the milk. It's more about access to the market and showing goodwill to our biggest trading partner. You do that, then you start talking about how Canadians will refine their own ore and steel and aluminum and stop brokering Chinese steel as Canadian steel into the United States. And then you got a stew. And then you have a trade partner who's willing to be a partner. And that's the difference, right? Justin Trudeau is trying to make it about gender equality, gender language, and things that don't belong in an intergovernmental deal. This is not going, gender language in an agreement is not going to solve the aluminum tariffs. Aluminium, my British mom. But that's not going to solve it, right? So the supply management is just like it's so multifaceted. It's quite intelligent, really, if you break it down. Because on one side of things, it gives you an indication if you're willing to bend to a cartel, right? And Andrew Scheer, hold on, I've just got I don't have any milk, but I've got this blue cup, Andrew Scheer, right? Like during his twice he made that joke, which is ridiculous, and a big to Bernier, which is just poor, right? Exactly like Justin Trudeau's thanks for your donation garbage, right? So the supply management ticks 3 boxes. One, it reduces price to end consumer, which is good for the poorest Canadians. 2, it signals to our biggest trading partner that we're willing to deal on things, and Trump will move, hopefully, if we actually talk about a free open market and free trade. And 3, did I forget the third one? 1, 2, open market, and yeah, I forgot the third one. I think I explained the third one. Forget it.
It's all good. We've been at this for a while. You're allowed to forget one thing. I think we'll forgive it.
Fair enough.
To be fair, though, you did answer that question again quite well. So well done. That was another one I didn't think we could get done in less than like 20 minutes, but you did. So thank you. Hopefully, Faye, that answers some of your questions. I'm not saying it will make her change her mind or anyone else who's concerned about this, but and I think you've explained supply management to a couple of people that didn't understand it. So well done. You've educated a few people today. I'm going to end with a really light question from the chat that has nothing to do with politics.
All right.
Noticed you had a vape. St. Jean wants to know, how did you find switching from smoking to vape? Have you had trouble? And then they're having a conversation about dizziness and figuring out how to manage all that. What are your thoughts? It's really, really, really light comment. So
yeah, fair enough. I never smoked marijuana. I don't know how to roll a joint. I was terrible. I came to marijuana late in life via a prescription, believe it or not. And it was one of those things that I will say hands down, marijuana is the best mood stabilizing drug, period, ever. Like it's incredible. But anyway, enough about that. The vape. So I never had a comparison to make. Like I really didn't smoke marijuana until I was 30 years old. So I was very late to it, and I didn't know how to like do a bong. Somebody showed me how to do a popper at a party once, like probably when I was 25, and I was like, this is crazy. So I'm the wrong person to ask. Sorry.
Fair enough. I think maybe they didn't know too. You can never tell if it's someone vaping like nicotine or someone vaping cannabis, right? So it's always hard to tell if someone's using it for, I don't know if they were speaking of quitting cigarettes, but I think they had a good chat and they're talking about nicotine. I don't know. I've never smoked cigarettes myself, so I don't know much about nicotine levels. Someone also wants to know, do you think vaping is merely a trend in a sense? I've seen that maybe with in some senses, I think it is, especially for kids, but it's for some people, particularly with cannabis, vaping is different than using it. Like I myself am a medical cannabis user. I completely agree that it's taken over about 5 medications for me. It doesn't kill all pain, but it's just incredible for pain, or when you can't sleep because of pain. Nausea has been huge. It has allowed me to gain more weight back so that I can actually, live my life and all of these sorts of things. It's a pretty incredible plant when it's used properly.
Yeah, for sure.
But when it comes to vaping, in that respect, it's very different than vaping like cigarettes, because with cigarettes you have to have that e-liquid and there's usually flavoring, and I think a lot of people struggle with actually like the propylene glycol in that, which can be a sensitivity, like a chemical sensitivity.
Yeah.
When you're vaping cannabis, usually it's like, depending, there's people that use oil, there's people that use herb, there's different types of vapes, whole different ball game. My understanding is, so if you're using it medically, it's a whole different game than the trendiness of the new cool e-cigs that 16-year-olds are getting in banana flavor and raspberry or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I've never, I did smoke cigarettes. I was a Belmont smoker, and I stopped smoking cigarettes well before I started vaping. Yeah. Maybe there was crossover. There's a little bit of crossover maybe, but I couldn't comment on it intelligently. I apologize.
No, not a problem. I just, someone asked, I thought I'd throw it out
fair.
there. Someone said, I just wanted to see, I see a cherry scented, I enjoy a cherry scented cigar bi-weekly myself outdoors. That's what Captain Brandon, Mr. Rockabilly says, one of my newer subs that I found in a comment section. That's funny because we can't have cigarillos in Canada anymore. Was it last year? I think it was December of 2006, 17. I'm trying to think when that happened. They stopped selling. You can't buy like cherry flavored cigarillos anymore at all. It's extremely frustrating. They were worried about it patented and I guess agreeable to cigars. So now me as a 33-year-old can't enjoy one bloody cherry cigarillo, ever in my life again, because it's banned now. It's just ridiculous. I remember going to the gas station on the way to Winnipeg for Christmas to visit family, and we just wanted to grab a black cherry, what's that old brand? I can't remember. Prime Times, was it? And you can buy the tobacco, you can buy and roll them yourself, but you can't buy you can't buy cigars on their own anymore, which is ridiculous.
Gotta get a pipe. My granddad used to smoke a pipe.
Oh, really? Yeah. Like the old corn pipe, maybe, you know. And
I've got one of his maple ones.
Nice.
Maybe next time I'll have it. That would be funny.
That's top hat too, and get your cane, and we'll do the whole works. Hey.
Yeah, really.
That's a good place to stop. Thank you guys for your great questions. I see there's a really cool conversation going on about the monarchy and taxes, and we've really got some minds moving maybe as fast as our minds move. I don't know.
Interesting. Cool.
Do you want to say anything at the end? Do you want to plug your channel? Do you want to talk about your campaign? Anything you want to say heading out here, Mark?
No, thanks for watching, everybody. I appreciate it. You can check me out at CANADAPOLI.com. I'm the candidate for Guelph, and man, it's been fun. Thanks for having me, Kelly. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. We've been trying to do this for a few weeks, and then life just happened. Things get busy. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for being willing to show us all your face, because I think we've all been wondering, what does this guy look like? We can all hear your voice. So thank you very much for coming on and for the insight into your channel and into kind of what you're doing. Please do check out Canada Poli if you haven't already. Does some fantastic news summaries if you just don't have time to get into the news. He covers a lot of stuff. He's honest, like you said. He's willing to say that he's wrong. He's not pushing propaganda, and he's not pushing anything too crazy. So definitely a must for anyone who's wanting to even share his videos to try to wake some people up. They're a good moderate viewpoint that I think people can respect. So I'm going to let it go there, you guys. If you don't mind throwing a like on this on your way out, it helps out the algorithms and all that. As we know, conservative commentators have to work a little harder on YouTube. So thank you guys for your support. As always, be good to each other, but not because the government tells you to. Bye, guys.